Warning. The following video contains strong language that some viewers may find offensive or disturbing.
Teachers of Reddit, when did you realize a kid was gifted? We took standardized tests like the second week of school. Hadn't really done much academics yet as it was elementary school, grade 5, and most of what we'd done was routines and introductions games. Kids scored at a 10th grade level in math and 9th grade in reading. Okay, whatever. Impressive but not unheard of. Except this kid was at the worst school in the state. Literally, ranked dead last. His whole schooling career. Nobody else in my class scored above a 6th grade level in anything and most were 3/4 grade level. I basically had to do entirely separate lesson plans for this kid. While the rest of my class did multiplication facts. I had a coding curriculum and was teaching him basic languages. He had his own reading group in addition to the high reading group. It was even more incredible, because he'd always been in trouble and in the principal's office the years before. I sent him to ISS once. All year, really low for that school. Kids on other classes went literally daily. I had a few go once a week. I begged his mom to switch him out of that school track. Said I'd fill out any paperwork. Write any letters. It was my only year as a teacher. Not sure what happened to him. Mom never contacted me. He finished the year by shattering all of his records on testing exams. Literally the 0.01% on his tests. He's legitimately one of the smartest kids I'd ever met. From the poorest school with the worst conditions I've ever seen. After less than 1 year of music lessons, it was clear the student would likely become a concert pianist when he learned 15 of Bach's two-part inventions from memory, and played them brilliantly. This kid was always bright but never really inspired by much of what he did. Seemed a little lazy but wasn't troublesome. He was just kind of a neutral kid in the class. That we did one day of Lewis structures and he thought it was too easy. Gave him a harder worksheet which he finished in like 3 seconds. So I gave him an organic formula that had 12 different isomers and some resonance structures. He came up with all of them in less than 15 minutes, including ones that had to do with how the object would look in 3D even though we never covered it. Kid is currently working on his PhD at Yale in organic chemistry. I knew when he surprised me by reassembling an engine out of a car all by himself in a single 90-minute class period. It was right before school let out for COVID. I had to hurry up and get some projects thrown back together quickly since school was closing. He asked to do it so I let him try and went off to do other things. By the end of the class it was completely assembled. Never asked me for help and it was working, definitely gifted. My sister was 20 and had an old Civic. My dad is a mechanic and came home from work to find she had taken half the engine out. Cleaned and sprayed it pink. And reinstalled all the parts herself with no help. He was so impressed he started her apprenticeship, first female in the company, a week later. And 6 years later she was head-hunted to another company. And is part of a pit crew for a rally car. And also has her own race car which is actually her first Civic that she souped up herself. I teach special ed. And people talk about savantism when it comes to Asperger's and autism, but the truth is that only really happens once in a blue moon. Well, I was lucky enough to teach a kid who was the genuine article. His grades were tops. And he taught himself programming and Japanese so he could go to Japan one day and make video games. We would spend his free time talking about astrophysics and recent documentaries. Every now and then he would ask me about something he had just absorbed and want to explain to me in detail. I just tried to keep up and ask him questions that kept him thinking about what his new information meant in context and what in the big picture of the universe or life or gaming or social interaction. Unfortunately, the kid had no ability to emotionally regulate, because that's just how the condition hits some people. Loud noise and unclear rules could send him into a hella rage. There's one classroom he could go into because he could hear the electric hum in the lights and he bothered him to violence. I mostly just taught him coping mechanisms. And being honest about his feelings so he could tell when he needed to leave a situation. Oh, and I taught him poker. He liked the math behind the probability and I used exaggerated bluffing to teach him facial expressions. Great kid. I am excited to learn what he goes on to do. An interesting test for toddlers is to see if they can hold an extended back and forth conversation with adults. Most kids at this age, and most grown-ass adults, are just asking for something or telling you something. Biology teacher here. Had a new student come in at age 15. He didn't talk much, but he did all his work as asked and did it well. One day we were having a class discussion about something and he joined in. It ended up being a back and forth between just the two of us, and at some point I realized I was discussing pretty high-level stuff with a 15-year-old. He's a neurosurgeon now. Not a teacher, but a student with a gifted kid in his class. In 3rd grade we had a new student come in who had just moved to the country with his family. Our teacher saw he was smart. She challenged him with some math we were meant to learn in a couple weeks. He solved the problems no problem. Next she tried some 4th grade level math. Again he solved it with no problems. After that she called in one of the 5th grade teacher and she gave him some problems meant for 5th graders. As expected he solved those without any problems. They kept going until he got a question partially right. I believe by that point they were giving him stuff intended for early, mid-year 6th grade students. Last I heard this kid got a degree in mathematics from Carnegie Mellon University. Foreign exchange student from China in the 8th grade. His writing abilities far exceeded the majority of even the accelerated class. I moved him from regular English to accelerated, and not only was his writing strong, his insights were so deep and thoughtful. At the end of the year, I learned not only was he a top student in my class, he won Student of the Year in Spanish as well. Not a traditional teacher, but I taught guitar at a mom-and-pop guitar store in my hometown. A few years ago, a lady brought her 7-year-old daughter in for formal training. Now, 99/100th times, a kid that young wants to play the guitar until they get one. After that, it sits in a corner and collects dust until it makes its way to Goodwill or something. This girl had legitimate talent though. She managed to teach herself very basic chords on her own, and had even began writing music. Everything I taught her, she learned within seconds. I also discovered through comparison with my own ear training, that she had perfect pitch. Musicians are dicks. Many of us rarely recognize or appreciate true talent in someone else. But this girl was truly something special. If she isn't a famous, successful musician someday, it will be a travesty. I'm not a teacher, but I was for a while a medicine student and met an extremely gifted mate there. He was just 16 instead of 18, we found out later. He came from a Middle Eastern country and didn't speak a single word in our language. In less than a month he learned enough of the language to maintain a conversation, to follow classes, and to get around 95/100ths questions right in our first anatomy test. From that moment on, he just aced every single exam. And today he's working as a surgeon in the most important hospital of his country. I'm not a classroom teacher, mostly music, but I had a small group of 1st and 2nd graders for a math flex block. Basically we group the kids by level instead of grade or class. And I had the extension group. They had all the core concepts, and we were building on them. This one 2nd grade kid was something else. We were working on double-digit adding and subtracting with regrouping, borrowing. And somewhere along the line, this kid figured out multiplication. Then he figured out he can use those rules to multiply large numbers that end in zeros, e.g. 700 by 4. He expanded this rule to include more zeros. Then he figured out he could start putting numbers in the tens and ones slots. And then school was shut down. Ain't a teacher and it's my little brother, but I thought I'll share it. When I was around 14 and he was around 6 years old, I would watch lots of YouTube videos in English, ain't our native language, and he would just sit on the bed behind me and watch for hours. I thought he was just bored and didn't understand anything from what was being said. FFW, a year we were on a long car ride and he picked up a history book in English. After a couple hours he tells us he is done reading it. Dad laughs and says, "Oh sure. I ask him to read a sentence and translate it. He proceeds to absolutely nail it and shock us. I'm a preschool teacher and I knew a 3-year-old girl that had very extensive vocabulary and could already read really well. Once during lunchtime, a little boy scarfed down his food and her response was, "Wow, he must have been famished." I was blown away. She also taught me about the digestive system once during lunchtime. And it was accurate information. But her favorite subject was the solar system. She was full of facts about the solar system. And she would teach me new things all the time. I always told her mom that she wasn't ready for kindergarten. She's ready for college. I was teaching distance over time graphs. The students stated that if the line just went straight up that it would indicate teleportation because distance has been gained but no time has passed. This was 5th grade science. Edit, this kid ended up skipping 6th and 7th grade. 5th to 8th. He was a super humble kid. I miss having him in my class. Took a summer job helping at a daycare. One of the toddlers, about 18 months old, was way ahead of the rest. Could talk full sentences. Knew his ABCs. Could count beyond 20. Already had shapes and colors down. I've seen kindergarten-aged kids that haven't mastered some of these things. He's in his early 20s now with a master's in engineering and a 6-figure salary. I came into the room. He was playing a few strings on the guitar. I asked what it was and he soft pedaled it. I pushed a bit further and he started playing what he'd written. I was blown away. Of course it needed a bit of fine-tuning. A guitar solo in the middle. And a few ooh-la-las here and there, but he'd written a legitimate rock song. Blew his parents away when we played it in concert. I'm a special ed teacher and I teach kids who have emotional and behavior disabilities like oppositional defiance disorder or autism, which manifests as anger. That kind of stuff. But anyway, last year I had a kid who we think had a photographic memory and was a possible savant. He could see a map once and be able to draw it nearly perfectly hours or even days and months later. He had almost every detail too, and all the towns and cities spelled correctly and major land features and even the major highways correctly labeled and named. He also was like a human calculator. You could ask him nearly any math equation and he could answer it in a few seconds in his head. Granted, they couldn't be extreme equations, but pretty much anything like PEMDAS-wise he could do in his head quickly. His trouble was that he was very aggressive and we could never put him back in a gen ed classroom because he was such a danger to other kids and teachers if he became annoyed or upset. But he was a good kid and very intelligent, he just had a lot of trouble with his emotions and behaviors. When she never got a single question wrong on any of my assignments and ended each marking period with an average higher than 100 due to extra credit assignments. 11-year-old girl, year 7, in my maths class. She started asking questions that would have stumped the brightest in my top set year 11. It was a delight to have her in my class and I'm so jealous of the teacher who gets to teach her this year. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. See you next time.